While our red brothers live by the sword, we blue Kojin uphold the old ways, engaging in trade and valuing peace. Alas, men distinguish not between our clans, and judgment for the doings of the red falls unjustly upon the blue. Thus do men grow more and more reluctant to deal with us, denying us our treasures. This cannot continue.
On this I agree. Thus today, we'll be going over the Kojin law. The Kojin, the highly religious, not-so-teenage ninja-esque turtles. They're heroes in a half-shell, and they have turtle power. The Kojin are quite a fearsome fighting team. They're from the Ruby Sea, and they're green when the evil red Kojin attack. These blue Kojin turtle boys don't be cutting them no slack. Yeah, they're the not teenage, not mutant ninja-esque turtles. Samurai warriors and traders. Kojin power. But anyway, let's get started going over their lore. Their physical characteristics. The Kojin are incredibly well built, having large, muscular frames, each one of them having the ability to potentially outflex a Rugadin, and are so muscular they might even be able to impress Godbert Mandeville himself. So, quite simply, these turtles are built. On top of this, the Kojin have very large hearts and lungs, both metaphorically and physically, because they're all sweethearts. Aww. And because they can spend quite an extended period of time underwater on a single breath. Yes, contrary to popular belief, the Kojin actually cannot breathe underwater. They may be able to grant others a blessing to breathe underwater, but they don't use it on themselves, because they just don't need it. The Kojin are also one of the longest living races, potentially giving the Vieira a run for their money. We don't know exactly how long they live, but we do know that the age of 70 is still considered very young and inexperienced for them. So getting to the Vieira lifespan of about 400 years? Probably not an issue for them. Now, if we look at these muscle-laden stud bodies, we'll see some notable features, namely their shell, their face or mask, and the samurai-looking armor they wear. Let's go over the armor first. This is apparently natural armor, heavily implied as their own natural armor in the lore book. However, anyone who so much as simply looks at the Kojin will see this is clearly not part of their bodies. Their faces also very obviously being masked helmets, because, simply put, all other beast tribe and races have animated mouths when they talk, so I just can't imagine they choose to skip the Kojin. So what's actually going on here? We don't exactly know, but it's most likely not natural armor grown by themselves, but armor that is crafted from shells and carapaces, perhaps taken from one of the many different large crabs or sea snail species that live in the Ruby Sea. The Kojin could simply be taking these shells and carefully and meticulously carving out their armor from them, then attaching it to their bodies. They could then also be dyeing these armors to be either red or green to display which tribe they are part of. This would still then qualify as natural armor. As for the shells on their backs, we also don't have a definitive answer. They're either harvested from sea turtles, or are the Kojin's own natural shells. But the shells at the same time are very clearly not part of the Kojin's bodies and is strapped to their backs. Or if it's a part of their bodies, it's incredibly bizarre in how it's attached, and honestly wouldn't make much sense. At the same time, there is an argument that the Kojin culture, their mannerisms and speech make it sound like the shells are something that they are born with, or at the very least have their entire lives. And after death, their shells are still considered theirs. Shells are never reused. If this is the case, the shell would have had to grow with them from youth to adult, which isn't exactly possible if it has been harvested from sea turtles. Plus, their very culture is about preserving the natural order around them, to only harvest sea creatures in sustainable numbers to not disrupt nature. Hunting enough turtles for every Kojin to have their own shell? Probably not sustainable. My personal theory, which could be wrong, is that the Kojin are all born with the shell, but as they mature they sort of grow out of it, falling off of them when they are fully grown. The Kojin then collects together the shell and attaches it to their backs as it is a part of their culture. This would explain their culture revolving around their shells, how they would have it their entire lives, and prevent mass sea turtle slaughter. But again, this is just my theory. The truth could be that they harvest a lot of sea turtles. We just won't know till we either see a baby Kojin or a real explanation is released by the developers. But let's not dwell on this and move on to their culture and society, but at the same time also their religion and gods. It'll be easier to talk about them both at the same time since they're so very interwoven, because everything they do and strive for is for their gods, the Kami. I'll let Bunshin of the Blue explain it himself.
All creation is a tapestry through which the divine is interwoven. Kami are legion, and they can be found in the great and the small. Though they come and go as they please, they favor certain vessels. The ancient, the precious, the exquisite. We Kojin covet these vessels, these treasures. We go forth and bring them home to keep them safe and bask in their divinity. They bring prosperity and joy to us and our children.
Though do be aware that the objects the Kojin gather aren't always rare, expensive objects. Yes, because these objects are such exceptional pieces of art and craftsmanship, they normally are, but there are some objects that the Kojin dearly cherish that other races would consider worthless. For example, one side quest has you find a torn up cushion and present it to a Kojin. She declares it as the rarest treasure she has ever received. Why? Because the Kojin believe the Kami do not care about an object's monetary value. All that matters is the love, detail, and hard work placed into the object that make it a potential host for a god. Again, this means it's normally very expensive, but not always. Great and mighty leaders of any people can become Kami in the afterlife too. Those who were wise and knowledgeable. Great General Ganon Rijin of Doma is believed to have become a Kami, and there are numerous Kojin who are believed to be Kami as well. Fun fact, if you've been to Tamamizu, you've definitely seen this Kojin polishing a shell. The shell he's polishing is of a long dead Kojin who they believe became a Kami. The cleaning of the shell is their way of giving thanks to the spirit for watching over them. And because of how central the shell is to their culture, they believe that if any Kojin is to become a kami, they'll always choose to inhabit their own shell. Though now, of all the kami, there is one type of kami that is revered above all others, the Anatsu kami. These kami are older, stronger, the top gods amongst the kami, and the three most revered in the Far East, which include the Kojin, are Amaterasu, god of the sun, Tsukuyomi, lady of the moon, and Susanoo, lord of the revel. But please be aware that every race and even every village have a different version of these three gods. Different myths and different legends about them. So these three gods to different people may be a different gender, no gender, have wildly different appearances, different personalities, different worship requirements, basically a different god. The only constant is their name, title, and order in which they are born. Of the three, Susanoo is the most revered of them, so we get even more stories about him. But there are some consistencies in his origin myth, which we'll go over now. In most of his stories, Susanoo is written as a wandering hero. He would explore the realm in search for villains to eliminate and for people to help. He always battles huge amounts of monsters during his adventures, winning many different treasures. Though amongst the many treasures he wins, he always gets the same three sacred relics: the mirror, Yata no Kagami, the talisman, Yasakani no Magatama, and the katana, Ami no Murakumo. As a very interesting fun fact, these three objects in the real world exist. Sorta. At least the idea of them exists. Since the year 690, nice, a mirror, talisman, and sword were given to the emperors of Japan as part of their ceremony when taking the throne. And these are these objects' names, each symbolizing an important part of being a ruler of Japan. The sword is valor, the mirror is wisdom, and the talisman benevolence. Each of these are also virtues Susanoo is known for. Well, that and, of course, the fact that he is the party god. Glorious revelry and rejoicing with banquets and combat. I honestly really love the Kojin incarnation of him. He's probably my favorite primal. He's just so happy all the time. Even when you beat him, he's just all smiles.
'Twas a memorable dance indeed.
Now, there are aspects of their culture that isn't as influenced by their faith, but still very important to talk about. So, Culture and Society Part 2, No Religion Boogaloo. Their philosophical split into red and blue. Just like the Ananta, the Kojin had a cultural split thanks to those dang Garleans doing a naughty around them. The two groups being the Kojin of the red and the Kojin of the blue. The Kojin of the red are the far more numerous and highly militaristic group. Originally, they actually tried to fight against and resist the Garlean invasion, but they were quickly outmatched. Thus, they resorted to hiring themselves out as sellswords and mercenaries to the Garleans, on the condition that they would forsake their faith. Though, of course, the Kojin never actually did. Instead, they began to worship the kami in secret. This mercenary work actually started to pay out for them, as they would often request objects as payments from the Garleans. always requesting objects they thought might hold kami, allowing them to still perform their sacred duty in gathering treasures for their vaults. The Kojin of the Red are led by any Kojin who is strong and charismatic, any who is able to influence other Kojin to follow them. Thus, they don't actually have a single central figure they follow, and just sort of follow a creed of do mercenary work, gather loot, worship in secret. These Kojin's symbol is that of a Kojin fist, representing their martial force. The Kojin of the Blue are the far more peaceful and approachable people. Thus, we know a lot more about them. These Kojin live in their ancestral traditional ways, using trade and going out treasure hunting to acquire their treasures, and refusing to hide their gods, openly worshipping them. If you respect their customs and their faith, these Kojin will always welcome you with open arms as a friend. These Kojin are known for their high level of skill in working with shells, coral, or other materials that they acquire from the sea, repairing objects or crafting wares from materials they scavenge and harvest. Kojin jewelry that incorporate pearls are especially popular. All these objects they repair or build are then either sold off or traded for objects that likely house kami. When sold, the money the Kojin received is placed in a sort of communal fund, where any Kojin can use the money in order to buy objects that house kami. Yeah, I know they said less religion here, but there's no way to escape it. Everything the Kojin do revolves around their faith. The Kojin of the Blue are led by a single Kojin, the eldest amongst them. But this elder always leads in a manner that includes their fellow Kojin, hosting debates where all may join to talk about and resolve all issues and matters. Thus, these guys normally take a very long time to reach any conclusion. Their politics move very slowly. Their symbol is that of the Kojin shell, representing their soul. Now for the more general cultural things that's consistent between both groups. Both of these groups are known for their expertise on water and wind aspected magic, and have a very special magic that allows them to create everlasting magical bubbles of air. Such magic was used to create their village of Tamamizu, as well as the rain home of Sui no Sato, and also Shisui of the Violet Tides. The Kojin helping the rain because the Kojin would do that out of the kindness of their heart.
Is what I would like to say, but my motives are not so pure.
In truth, they do it because they know being friendly to other races could result in them finding more treasures or receiving favorable trade for treasures. For example, they have a very good relationship with the Pirate Confederacy, always being notified first on any goods the pirates acquire, and always being allowed to purchase these goods before anyone else, if they're interested. Both the Kojin of the Red and the Kojin of the Blue have the same diet. I'm sure this is going to shock you, but the Kojin diet is almost entirely seafood, fish, shellfish, seaweed, kelp, really anything from the Ruby Sea. The Kojin of the Red cook their meals before consuming them, while the Kojin of the Blue mostly eat their catch raw. This is because living in a giant bubble on the bottom of the ocean doesn't exactly have ideal conditions for starting a fire. Not a lot of air circulation, and they don't exactly have a desire to be smoked out of their own village. But because they don't use fire, this has led to one unique cultural dish, Gasame stew, which is where they use the shell of the gasame crab, which is basically a volcano crab, as a pot to heat up food. Since this is a fire aspected animal, its shell just naturally gives off heat and cooks anything placed in it for a while. The Kojin of the Blue also trade for wine, fruits and vegetables, jerked fish and meat, anything they feel like really. So honestly, the Blue Kojin diet could actually be considered quite varied. Now, before we finish off with their culture, there's one little fun fact tidbit I really want to go over. The Kojin of the Red are red, but the Kojin of the Blue are green. Why is this? In-game lore, we don't know. Perhaps it's due to Eorzean scholars trying to translate the Kojin's native language and making an error. Perhaps it's due to the Kojin being unable to tell the difference between blue and green. We don't exactly know. But the real world reason behind why they have this quirk is really cool. The Kojin are inspired by ancient Japanese culture. And in ancient Japanese culture, they didn't really distinguish between blue and green. Back then, green was considered as merely a shade of blue. Thus, the Kojin reflect this cultural quirk by not distinguishing between blue and green. And that's why we have green Kojin who call themselves Kojin of the Blue. I just thought this bit was too interesting to leave out. But let's finish off this Kojin lore dive, going over their naming conventions. Unsurprisingly, as with everything else in their culture, their naming is also based on their faith. Let's explain how. It all starts when a Kojin mother lays an egg. When an egg is laid, they believe a new soul falls from the heaven into the sea. This soul is destined for the egg, but cannot immediately enter it. The transition from heavenly realm to the mortal realm would be too sudden and could cause the soul harm. Therefore, they must first inhabit a regular object to ease themselves into the mortal world. This is also why the egg doesn't hatch immediately. The soul is too busy inhabiting one of the thousands of objects inside the Kojin vaults. When the soul is ready, it enters the egg, and a new Kojin is born. The Kojin believe that the object the soul first inhabited creates a mark on the soul itself, and thus influences the character and personality of the Kojin. Therefore, the Kojin are named after items that their soul is believed to have inhabited before entering their egg. How do they find out what this object was? Well, the newborn Kojin isn't given a name immediately, and are instead watched when they are young. If during this time they seek out vast amount of knowledge through studying, perhaps they were first inside a paperweight, thus are named Bunshin, which is Far Eastern for paperweight. If they have a knack for trade and mathematics, perhaps they inhabited an abacus, Soroban. If they are naturally gifted in martial combat, perhaps they inhabited a helmet, Kabuto. So yeah, any object in the Far Eastern tongue is a potential Kojin name. The Far Eastern languages, Hingashi and Doman, are both heavily inspired by, if not just straight up the Japanese language. So if you want a Kojin name, just pick an object and figure out what it is in Japanese. And there we have it. All the lore we know about the not-so-teenage, not-so-mutant ninja turd, the Kojin. I hope you enjoyed. Next, we'll be looking at the final beast tribe before we start waiting for the Endwalker tribal quests. The Wolfmen from the Far East. The best boys and girls. Tomorrow we'll be looking at the Lupin. But for now, goodbye my friends, and have a great day.